All right, now I want to talk about the early 20th century art and music and dance. So this is from 1900 to 1945. So some famous artists from this time period: Gustav Klimt. So he did a lot of his stuff with actual gold leaf. There's actually a really good movie called The Woman in Gold that was made about one of his artworks that I highly recommend. It's a really interesting story about how um, that painting was stolen by the Germans during World War II and kind of the fight to get it back. And there it is. That's The Woman in Gold. So that's the painting that was stolen. Henri Matisse. So if you notice, we're moving past impressionism. It's not, we're not doing these bright colors that are just, landscapes and things like that. Like we're starting to get a little more abstract. Things are starting to get a little weirder. Kandinsky, he was really at the forefront of this, um, this weird kind of art where it wasn't it wasn't abstract anymore. Now, this one is considered abstract. This is actually abstract in cubism. So if you notice, everything's kind of broken up into these different shapes, but you can still tell that this is a person playing guitar. So you can see the guitar, you can see the lips, the nose, all kind of spread out. So again, what their ideas were at this time was trying to take apart these objects or these people or whatever their subject was and breaking them into pieces, breaking them down to simple objects. So Beya, Duchamp. Now, Duchamp, this is what you might think it is. This is actually a urinal. This is called the fountain. Now, the story behind this is Duchamp is actually a really great artist. He was a really big painter, but he got into this rut where he would try and put his work into shows, and he kept being denied, and people kept saying your artwork isn't good enough. So he wanted to kind of turn the art world on its head, and his whole idea was that any object that you say is art can be art. So anything taken out of its original context can be art. So if you took your computer, put it in an art museum, since you called it art, it has to be art. So that's what he did with this urinal. So he just took it off the wall, put R Mud on there, which was his nickname, and put it in a museum, and then it ended up selling for millions of dollars. He also did this bicycle wheel on top of this stool. He added this mustache and goatee to the Mona Lisa. Other famous people: Alfred Stieglitz. So he was a famous photographer. So he actually took this really famous photo that made Duchamp's piece very famous. Max Beckmann, Kathy Kollwitz, who's a really famous printmaker. So this is all a wood block. So she just took a piece of wood and she ended up carving all the pieces that she wanted white. She covered it with black ink and then printed it. Max Ernst. So this is starting to get into surrealism. So kind of this dreamlike world. Magritte. Oppenheim. So with this one in particular, so Oppenheim was having breakfast with Picasso when he complimented her fur and said everything is improved with fur, which led her to say even this cup and saucer, which then sparked this idea to create this piece. So this is an actual cup and saucer that you could hold in your hand. And this is actually located in New York at the Museum of Modern Art. Miro, Paul Klee, Chagall, Mondrian. Now, what you're seeing here, same thing kind of with Duchamp. Piet Mondrian was a fantastic artist. He could paint um, very realistic cityscapes. And at the time, he wanted to do something a little different. He wanted to break down exactly what was happening in these cities, in his cityscapes. So his idea was that what you're seeing is all these black lines are New York City streets, and all of these colors are different buildings that he decided to paint in. So this is just breaking down, a city into its simplest form. So here's an example of one of his really good paintings. just to kind of show you that he can do more than just paint squares. Brancusi, Henry Moore. Now, the story behind this is actually on a college campus, and a few years ago they had a big protest about this piece. And a lot of people said it was so ugly and it was ruining their college campus, um, which was kind of a shock to the art world because this was by Henry Moore, who's a big respected sculptor and painter. So the college ended up telling the students to just kind of ignore it if they didn't like it because they definitely weren't going to move it. Edward Hopper. So this is called Nighthawks. This is actually not a real scene. Edward Hopper ended up making this up. It's actually based on the Flatiron Building. So down here where it meets, he was walking past there one night, saw this shape, and thought it would make for a really interesting scene. So he ended up having his friends and just different models pose for him, and then he ended up inserting them into this painting. Grant Wood, so American Gothic. This is actually his sister and his dentist. He ended up choosing them because he thought they had really interesting faces. So here they are standing next to the painting. Now, the big one that I want to talk about, Pablo Picasso. So Picasso, he's a Spanish painter and sculptor, most known for founding the Cubist period, which is something I mentioned earlier. Picasso made staggering contributions to the development of abstraction and to new ways of representing the surrounding world. So just to kind of show you that Picasso is a great artist, because a lot of people look at his work and they think, oh, I could do that. He was actually well trained, had a lot of skill. This is something that he drew when he was 16. And with Picasso, he had these different time periods where he would kind of experiment and change his art style completely. So his first one was the Blue period. So before Picasso was rich and successful, he had this time period where his 7-year-old sister died and one of his friends committed suicide. So the series focused on the outcast like himself in the early 1900s. So it was focusing on people that were poor or homeless, jobless, people like him that were kind of down and out. People that had a different look to them that people would kind of make fun of. That was something that he wanted to focus on and give these people a personality and show that they are just as good enough to be on an artwork. Then he transitioned into the Rose period. So this is from 1904 to 1906. During this time period, he began this relationship with this model, which made him focus more on like pleasant themes. So you'll notice, there's circus performers and clowns and just, it's more upbeat. It's not as down and sad as the Blue period. So, their faces are still a little sad, but the overall tone is getting a little brighter. Now, this one actually has an interesting story. This one was hanging in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. And in 2010, this older woman was on a tour when she tripped and fell. And she actually punched a hole through the middle of the canvas, which you can see if you see it today. You can see kind of where they fixed it. But that tear cut the value in half by $65 million. Then we start getting into his Cubism period. So this is kind of, really what he's known for. Now, if you notice, all these faces look really weird and interesting. The reason for that is because he was starting to be influenced a lot by African mask. So he was adding these African mask kind of qualities onto these faces. So everything's kind of starting to be exaggerated and elongated. And then he's starting to break down, just like that Piet Mondrian did with the New York City, where he did the squares. He's starting to break down the human body into squares. And then this kind of shows you the path that we've taken throughout art history that we talked about this year, going from this to Impressionism last time to something like this. Now, I always argue with people because they say this is so ugly. That isn't real art. They could do that. I always ask them, if you had all of these hanging up in the hallway at school, including this one, which one would you stop and look at? And then this is his most famous or most valuable piece. This is worth almost $200 million. And then here's that idea again about taking an object or a thing, for example, a bull, and breaking it down to its simplest form. So the idea is that if you look at this picture right here, you could tell what animal that was, that you don't need all of the details that he put in the first one. Then one of his most important pieces is Guernica. So in 1937, to commemorate the disaster of the Nazi bombing campaign on the town of Guernica in Spain, Picasso painted this image. So there's a lot going on here. You'll see, there's a lot of pain, there's explosions, there's people being trampled by horses, people dying. It's a lot. And these are some of his sketches. And then I always like to talk about this because people always ask, like, how does the artwork get so expensive? Um, it is just kind of a supply and demand kind of thing. But you can see that in 1941, this painting was sold to sold to this family that originally bought it for $7,000. That family passed it on from generation to generation, and then in 2001 they sold it for $61 million to this casino owner. The casino owner held on to it for 12 years and made almost a $100 million profit. And then just to kind of give you a little context, this is the most expensive painting in the world. So that's the 15th highest, and this is number one. All right, next person I want to talk about is Dorothea Lange. So she's probably one of the most famous photographers of all time. She did a lot of work with the Depression era, including this one, The Migrant Mother. So this is her most famous photograph. This photograph is very important to history. She went to the Dust Bowl around this time period, and she was going through all these camps and taking pictures of all of these people that were struggling to live. And she found this mother with her children and had them pose. And then she ended up, so here's some kind of outtakes. They're discolorized. But she had them pose, and then it ended up making the cover of, every newspaper and magazine in the country. And it kind of brought everybody's attention to this kind of unknown world that a lot of people didn't know about. So, hired by the Resettlement Administration in 1936, Lange photographed the dire situation of the rural poor in the U.S. Her photographs document the reality of the time. So this was something that a lot of people weren't experiencing. All right, next person I want to discuss is Salvador Dali. So you might know him from this painting, The Persistence of Memory, so the Melting Clocks painting. So he's a Spanish surrealist painter, so he does dream-like worlds. So a lot of the things you'll see on here may be kind of hard to figure out what they are. For example, this little white object, no one knows what it is. It's got eyelashes, it's got kind of a face down here, but no one knows. And what's really interesting is this painting in real life is smaller than a piece of paper. It's very, very tiny. So here's a similar kind of world. So when he came out, this was very shocking to people. But he ended up getting a big following, and he's one of the rare painters that was very rich and successful when he was alive. He also did these giant sculptures. Now, this one's really interesting because it starts playing with this idea of what did you see first? So I always ask in class, what did you see first? Did you see the egg or did you see the world? And then you start to try to question, what does it mean? Why is this person cracking out of here with this blood trail running out? What's this object? What does it all mean? This painting's really interesting because a few years ago, Disney actually worked with Dali's family and they create all these virtual reality worlds. So if you go on YouTube and type in Salvador Dali virtual reality or 360 video, you'll be able to go inside this world and use your phone and kind of look around like you're walking around in this world with all these giant elephants walking towards you. It's really, really cool. He also did a bunch of drawings. And this is another one that I think is really, really interesting. So this was an anti-venereal disease poster made for the 1941, made in 1941 for World War II. So you have these women, but if you notice, there's also this skull that is being presented along with this soldier. So which one did you see first? Did you see the skull or did you see the women? So another interesting one. So if you read on the side, this depicts Dali's wife. At the time, he was obsessed with nuclear physics and how atoms make up matter without touching. So what's really interesting about this image is that if you look at it, sitting right in front of the computer, you can see each individual circle. But if you step back, it all starts to kind of form together and make a cohesive picture. And then this is a photograph. So all of this is a real photograph. This isn't Photoshop. This isn't, anything. They had to take this, you know, many, many times. There's actually a video on YouTube of them trying to create this, but they would throw up all of these things at once, trying to capture a surrealist photograph. Next person, Georgia O'Keeffe, one of the most famous female artists of all time. So she's affiliated with Precisionism. She moved from Texas to New York City, which you'll see kind of how that changed. She painted objects in their simplest, purest forms, and she married the famous photographer Alfred Stieglitz, who I showed you a little earlier. So she liked to focus on flowers, the desert, skulls, things like that in detail. And her whole idea was that she wanted to zoom in on these objects and show you a perspective that you probably have never seen before. So very, very bright colors. We're getting away from Impressionism now. Everything's going back to very smooth and kind of this realistic paintings. All right, next up, Jacob Lawrence. A few years ago, I would have said he's the most famous African American artist of all time. He's probably the second most famous now. You'll see the most famous in another PowerPoint. But Jacob Lawrence, he's a Southern African American painter that migrated to Harlem, New York at the age of 10. He depicts, you'll see, stunning simplicity, the division between white and black that the African American population encountered in the North. So you'll kind of see, his culture and how it was being, kind of looked down on. You'll see, he uses, African culture and colors within his paintings. But then you'll have moments where, this was a population that wasn't getting a lot of recognition. It wasn't getting any kind of publicity. No art was being made about them. And so he wanted to show that they were just like, everyone else. They were going to the library. But then he also wanted to show, the struggles that they had. So this painting is part of a 60 painting set that he painted when he was 23. It depicts the Great Migration, where hundreds of thousands of African Americans moved from the South to the North after World War I. The series shows African Americans adjusting to their new cities and surroundings. And kind of notice the names on these. So they were very poor, fine beggars. I showed musicians and just people just working everyday jobs. And if you remember at all, or if you ever grew up watching Little Bill, this is where they got their inspiration from. Was from Jacob Lawrence. This is his most valuable work. This sold for 6.1 million. All right, next up, Frank Lloyd Wright. So he's a very famous architect, one of the most influential in history. He created buildings with the environment in mind, or the surrounding environment. He considered his buildings to be organic. So he would do offices, churches, private homes, hotels, museums, everything. This is one of his most famous works. It's the Robbie House in Chicago. Then he did the Guggenheim Museum in New York. So this actually spirals around just like this. This is what the inside looks like. And this museum, you have to travel all the way around to get up, and you'll see along the walls different artworks all the way up to the top. Then he also did Falling Water. So this is in Pennsylvania. So this is actually a river that runs through the house and out into this waterfall. So this is the inside of the house. Now this is one of the pieces that I thought was really interesting. And these photographs are actually mine that I've taken. When you walk down these stairs, you have the option of either going on to this balcony and overlooking the waterfall, or you can come down these steps and get into this natural swimming pool, which is really cool. So the river actually runs right through it, without washing you away. Or you can go down this side and actually dangle your feet and just hang them into the river. Something else that I thought was interesting. Now, these photos won't show it, but this building actually has this kind of light pink color to it, and you'll notice it kind of looks like a cream color in all of the photos that you ever see, but it's this light pink color that matches all of the trees when they turn a certain shade, so the house kind of blends into the environment. There's also outdoor showers with natural water. And then if you go up the side past here, there's the servants' quarters. And the servants' quarters actually has a little area built in so that you can go straight into the house. And here it is all frozen over. Then you may have seen this before. This is the Caden Tower in Louisville. All right, and then quickly, just some, people that did music during this time period. Stravinsky, considered the single most important composer of the modern era. Highly recommend looking him up on YouTube. Duke Ellington, one of the greatest jazz pianists and arrangers of all time. And then this is also the height of jazz. This is when jazz was first developing by African Americans. You can see it usually features syncopated rhythms and improvisation of the melody or the phrase. And that's it.